welcome to the Dad Hammer Podcast, a casual Warhammer show where we discuss all things 40k, Age of Sigmar, and literally everything else Warhammer related. So whether you are a beginner or a seasoned veteran, we are so glad that you've joined us on your Warhammer journey. I am your host, David the Warboss, and I am joined by a newcomer, a shadow in the dark, a new panelist. Will the Overlord. We're going with the Overlord, and we'll get into that in a second. But Will, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks. Glad to be here. Listened for a little bit. Played with you guys in person. Glad to
Yeah,
be part of the team now.
yeah, exciting. I have played against you. We played at one of our local game stores, Mechanical Keyboards, and a little shout out there. And I played against you, and I'll say just for our listeners that have been with us for a while, usually when I play against my crew, I'm kind of the rules guy. I'm the guy that understands the rules. Maybe one of our other buddies, Lawson, is more of a Rain Man when it comes to the rule book, and he kind of outshines me. But when I played when I played against you, I'm like, oh snap! I gotta Will. What do I do here? I need a rules extra rules lawyer, and clearly you've been playing the game for a long time. So tell us a little bit about like how did you get into Warhammer? How long you been playing? All that kind of stuff.
So I've been playing towards the end of ninth edition. I had a couple buddies who were big into Warhammer, and they've been talking about it. And we went over to their house. I saw a couple of those models, and I was like, man, those Necrons, they're fantastic. I got to get started with that one. Watched a
Yeah.
couple YouTube videos and ended up buying a couple sets, and here we are now at post pandemic. I had a lot of time to work on them, and ended up getting hooked.
Yeah. How many armies? So how many armies do you have in total right now?
Oh man, that's setting me up on that one. No, I've got
Loaded
I've
question.
got I've got 5 armies. I've got
Cool.
Necrons, I've got Grey Knights, I've got World Eaters, I've got Imperial Fists. Looking over at my counter over here, seeing what all I've got, and then I've also got. Let's see, and then I just started some Custodies not too long ago.
Nice. Yeah. So one of the cool things about, and I just for our listeners, what I would encourage you just to reach out. I mean, Will is somebody that we met at a game store, trying to find like-minded individuals, that can come on our show, especially those that have a passion for the game. And met Will, and we just kind of, I don't know, became buddies. And so this is really cool. But I would encourage our listeners, if you go to a game store, just start chatting people up and you build that circle of friends. And then what's really cool is that if you can find somebody that has a different army than everybody else, then you just never know what you're going to play against, which is cool. Well, anyway, welcome to the show. We've got a lot to discuss. Looking forward to your insights on all things Necron, and we got some good stuff to talk about here. So first, with a bit of news. So news has been a little light lately, but we've got some recent news with the Space Marine 2 video game. If you are also a video gamer, you may have been following the upcoming game Space Marine 2 that's coming out for PC and console and everything else. It has leaked in full to the land of the pirates everywhere, and so just to be clear, we're not going to do any spoilers. I haven't read any spoilers. I'm not into that kind of stuff, but we are going to talk about, what that means. If there's been a statement from the developer and all that kind of stuff. So we'll discuss that. And then we'll hit the new AOS app, which has been released. And I know that may not sound like riveting conversation, but it has a pretty big omission as far as a feature set is concerned. And so we're going to talk about that, give our impressions. And then finally, we're going to round out the segment with another installment of Warhammer 101, and this time with army list building. And it seems to be a pretty big topic of discussion for a lot of our listeners, especially on the heels of a new edition. So Age of Sigmar coming out. How do you build a list? What are the things you want to think about? But we're primarily a 40K podcast, so we play a lot of 40K. I know, Will, you have all 40K. But army list building, the principles apply to just about any war game, honestly. So we'll cover that and give you some tips on how to build your list, at least some things to think about. We're not seasoned experts or anything, but it just give you some some tips and some advice, and maybe to help you round out your list the next time you play a game. Cool. All right. Well, let's get right into the content here. I'm going to pull up for those watching on YouTube. I've got a screenshot here of the new Space Marine 2 game that is coming out soon. Has been leaked in full. So for just for reference, it's coming out September 9th, and it got out there. And once it's on the internet, man, it's just game over. No pun intended. So they released a statement. Dear players, we are deeply touched by the overwhelming support we've received from our community following the leak of our build of the upcoming game, Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2. Our teams have poured years of hard work, passion, dedication, creating a game worthy of your hopes and expectations, and it's disheartening that many of the surprises we worked to keep secret were spoiled. We're saddened that this build, which will be almost a year old by the time we launch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, unwavering commitment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're asking everyone to avoid this unfinished build and to not spoil the game for those excited to experience it. So I'm not going to read the full statement, obviously, but at the very end, it says, "See you all in a few weeks for the Emperor." So, I mean, Will, I think that they handled the leak well, but I can't imagine. I mean, just you think about that. You've been working on this game for literally years, and spoilers are a big deal in the entertainment industry in general, whether it's TV, movies, video games, especially, and people want to avoid spoilers. First of all, were you looking forward to this game? Was this a game that was on your list of a must buy?
Oh, absolutely. I've been hyping this one up to some of my guys who I play games with. So I've been waiting for this one, just really hoping that it's not a dud. Otherwise, I'll never be able to live that one down from them.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the previews. It looks phenomenal, first of all, and I played the original Space Marine game. And for those that have not played it, I mean, it's a third person game where you take control of a Space Marine, and the first one was going around just slaying orcs. So it reminded me of like the was it Dead Rising, like the or something like
Left
that.
4
One of those
Dead.
like zombie, maybe it's Left 4 Dead, like the zombie apocalypse games where you're walking around. What was the one where you're walking around with in a mall, a shopping mall, and
I
you're
think that
getting
was Dead Rising.
okay. Well, that's what it reminded me of. It's just complete carnage the entire time, and you're just doing combos and craziness. And this one looked more refined. It still looks refined, but my question to you, as someone who was looking forward to this game release, and I'm assuming you were going to drop cash to purchase it day one, or at least within the release window, with the leaks out there, and I'm not going to say that you partake into this, but does this all what kind of impact do you think this will make in the sales of the game, the reception of the game, that kind of thing?
I don't really think it's going to change too much. I mean, most people who are really into the IP in general were probably going to buy it if they had the consoles it was on. I have
Hmm.
seen a few of the leaks so far. I've seen a little bit of the first mission. Looks absolutely phenomenal. I'm
Yeah.
super excited for it. Very interested to see where the story goes. I know they've talked a little bit and shown some clips. I know we're fighting Tyranids. Got to tie it into the Leviathan box, but I think they're also going into Thousand Suns as well. So I'm excited to see what that looks like on like modern game engines.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it really does look stunning, and I think one of the big appeals just in general of Warhammer for even those I've got several buddies that don't care anything about assembling models or painting or even playing the tabletop game. But I had one of my buddies that was really trying to get into play Warhammer. Like, hey man, you could play these models. I'll paint them for you. Just trying to get someone else into the game. And he said, "Well, that's a hard no for me, but the video games is all my kind of crazy." I think is what he said. Just the lore and the insanity of the 40K universe is really, I think, something people really enjoy. And so Space Marine 2, for all intents and purposes, it looks to capture all of that. Um, but I mean, if you're a developer, especially this company, that's got to be a gut punch because that's going to impact their sales. But what do you think this is going to have any kind of impact? So much so that it's going to be catastrophic where financially where they can't make a Space Marine 3. Let's say this comes out with a 10 out of 10 rating and everybody just raves about it. It's still out there on torrent sites and stuff for people to download for free, and it's not going to generate the income that that they were anticipating. Do you think this is going to impact a Space Marine 3 release?
I don't really think so. I've seen little bits and pieces that there are assets missing from the game. So there's like certain textures, things that are just like the generic, like just PNG textures. So it's not a full per se game leak. So obviously I think people are gonna continue to buy it, just be able to get that finished, polished experience. I think
Hmm.
that the leak was from, I think the date on it was June. So obviously between June to September, they've got plenty of time to be able to work on that one. I don't believe the game was gold by the time that the leak happened, so it wasn't 100% finished. It wasn't shipped to publishers. So there's still obviously certain things that could change, but I think it's just going to be a different level of polish than you'll see in the leak.
Yeah, but even the polish, I mean, still the game is, I mean, I would think 95% complete at this point.
Yeah, I think the
And
biggest thing
so,
as well is also multiplayer capability. I don't think they've
mhm.
got it on the leak. So between like the special operations with your buddies, playing the campaign with your buddies, and then having the 5v5 Eternal War mode, I think that in general will probably sell itself.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think I'm a big single player campaign fan. I always like that. I missed that from the Call of Duty games way back in the day when those the original. I'm old enough to be the when the original Modern Warfare came out on the Xbox 360, way back before. So the Modern Warfare that they did fairly recently was a reboot. So this was like Call of Duty Modern Warfare 4, I think, or Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare.
Yep.
Um, yeah, back on the 360, and that campaign was still just like there are certain games that have moments for me that I remember. Call of Duty Modern Warfare with the ghillie suit and the sniper levels. That was so amazing. I mean, the other games like Bioshock when I first played Bioshock and Fallout 3 coming out of the vault for the first time. And so I'm a big single player campaign person, but I know that I may be in the minority because a lot of people just get Call of Duty and other games like it, Fortnite and stuff, Apex Legends, just for the they're just there for the multiplayer. So maybe that'll sell it. I mean, was that a feature that you were really looking forward to? Is the multiplayer side?
It was definitely a surprise. I didn't really expect it to be too much, but it's definitely proved to be a selling point with a bunch of my buddies. So I think that'll help out a little bit with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still. We've talked about this before on the show. I'm still waiting for a fully fledged 40K tabletop simulation type game. I mean, you can play it with Tabletop Simulator on Steam if you played that, but boy, the UI and the learning curve to get that thing to operate like you want is a pain. I
It's
just,
something.
I mean, it's one of those things where you really have to want to learn how to do that, and I'm just not there. I just not something that I'm down for. So I still want Games Workshop to release a PC tabletop simulator type game. That's what I'm hoping for. But I think it's a pipe dream at this point. Well, I mean, Space Marine 2, I would encourage, those of you that are still interested, financially speaking, you got to do what you got to do, but, put yourself in the shoes of the developers and the people that work really hard to produce this top-notch game. From all intents and purposes, it looks like it. Some of the previews that I've read, not no spoilers, but I've read the previews and everyone's saying it's really, really good. So, if you're able, definitely check it out legally, legally, not illegally, but legally. So we'll see more about that in the future, and we'll definitely will want your take on it once you've played a few levels and give us your opinion on the game itself.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now let's move on to the next bit of news here. We're going to hit on this just for a few minutes. We've talked about it previously, but the new Age of Sigmar app has been released. This is got here up on just a quick screenshot that pulled from the website. It's I've downloaded it. Will, I know you have. We were talking about it before the show. Good looking app, looks very similar to, I mean, it's got the Stormforge feature at the bottom. It's got the reference where you can pull up the rules. I built an army of Stormcast Eternals just to kind of play around with it. They have the different um, what are the I want to say clans, but that's not. Again, I've only played Age of Sigmar a handful of times, so the way you can do like different factions or clans within your particular army. Um,
Mhm.
and that's cool. It has a little flavor. So all of the stuff that you have in the 40K app, but there is a caveat, at least in my opinion. This is not a it's not a deal breaker, but it's just really disappointing. Is the lack of and I'm going to call it command bunker. I think that's what it's called. The feature in the 40K app, which was the little helmet mask looking symbol thing in the top right hand corner. So after you have put together your list and you gotten all your units down there, you're ready to go and you're ready to play the game. You're either gonna have your books and you're gonna print everything out, and scan or whatever, and take all that. Or like me, I want to go more digital, so I'll bring a tablet or a phone or something with me, and I want to have everything ready to go. The issue with the 40K app a few months ago was that it's just a lot of back and forth. So you pull up the unit and, well, I want to look at what my other thing does, and you got to go back and you back out, and then you have to go to see what your abilities are. And it was just kind of a pain. It wasn't a single pane of glass type of experience. And then they added this feature called Command Bunker, which you hit that button and then you can look at everything. It's really nice. You could just scroll all the way down, and now it makes it viable for you to play with the tablet. So then this Age of Sigmar app comes out. All looks good. And then I was actually feeling pretty good about it. And then Will, you were like, oh man, no command bunker. I'm like, what? So I didn't even notice it. Um, I mean, I guess my question to you, why would they not include one of the best features that they've added with the Warhammer app since its inception?
Yeah, I was pretty bummed about that one as well. I'm just getting started with Sylvaneth, so I'm definitely looking forward to playing some Age of Sigmar. But not
Yeah,
having
yeah.
that and having to click through every single option, going back and forth and back and forth, it's definitely going to be a bummer. I've gotten really used to using the command bunker when I'm playing 40k. It's definitely going to
Hmm.
be a feature that I miss, and I'd be just bewildered if they didn't add it at some point eventually.
Yeah, I mean, you would think so. I mean, is this going to force you to not use the app, or are you just going to grin and bear it and continue using? Are you going to be printing things out and bringing books?
Probably go the old Staples route and print them out and have a little book to
Oh
cycle through.
man. So, all right. So here's another conspiracy theory for you. You know, they have those cards, right? They sell you the cards, the faction pack cards or whatever, with all of the stats on them. Yeah, you think they're delaying the feature in the app so that you'll go out and you'll buy the cards, and then they release the app feature in like 3 months after you've gotten all the suckers out of the out of the way. I mean, I'm joking, but not at the same time, and because I think it's going to work,
Oh,
unfortunately.
I totally think it will. Give it about really, I think they're called battle tomes in this one. Give them about 4 or 5 battle tomes, and it'll show up one day for us.
Yep. And then they'll say, "We've been hard at work. We've heard your requests." And man, what a marketing spin though, because I I always like to assume positive intent. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. So let's assume that they have developers working on it. And, it's not just a copy paste, right? A lot of us mere mortals that aren't developers like to think that all you got to do is just copy the code and then paste it over into the other. It's fine, just drag and drop. When it's totally not that way, you really have to put in some significant work. But man, when they're developing a new app, they didn't just say, oh, make sure you add command bunker because we want to make it in parity with our 40K app. So, do you think there's a conspiracy there, or do you think it's just part of the development cycle?
I'd love to say it's part of the development cycle, but I can definitely see as a nice little marketing spin for it.
I mean, it's going to work. I think I don't know yet. I mean, I may end up the only difference I think, and I've yet to play a game of the new Age of Sigmar, even though I have the Skaven Tide box and the rule book. I just haven't had a chance to actually play a game yet. I'm hoping to within the next couple of weeks, but the only difference that I've noticed with 40K, at least in past editions of 40K, especially in 8th and 9th edition, with 40K is that if you there was so much war gear, changing that you had to do, and your models had different weapons, and then in the units and stats and stuff, those would all change, and so it was always something to have to go back and forth and modify. Age of Sigmar seems a little more static with their weapons and assignments. So maybe it's not as big of a deal to use paper or get the cards. Have you ever used? I mean, I don't know if you what your history with Age of Sigmar is, but have you ever used the cards or anything like that in the past with Sigmar?
No, I'm brand new. I'm playing my first game later
Brand
this
new.
week, and
Okay.
we'll see how that goes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I played about let's say 5 or 6 games, maybe a little more than that of Sigmar, and it definitely takes some getting used to. But I've talked about this on the show of how just brutal the game is. I mean, you feel like you are going to lose immediately half the time because it's. I think the big difference with Sigmar and 40K, honestly, is when you play 40K, if you lose a couple of your main units, I mean, it's this game over pretty much. I mean, unless you just really come out with some miracle dice rolling with Sigmar, you could lose half your army, and I feel like you're still in the game just because a lot of units dish out mortal wounds. They're just tons of mortal wounds, and they just can't save, and it's just they're just dead. Man, I mean, I've seen that with a lot of my games that I played with Sigmar, where I feel like the game is over, and depending on how much you you lose out of your units on the table, it actually could be over, but I feel like it's a less of a feeling of I'm going to get tabled turn one in Sigmar. So even though, and I guess being brand new to the game, what drew you to Sigmar now of all times? Is it because of the new edition, or was it prior to that?
Certainly because of the new edition. I was definitely looking for just like different things to do. I played a lot of 10th edition so far, and I was just kind of
Mhm.
seeing my options. I saw a couple of people playing it at the GW store, watched a little bit of their game, and I was like, "Hey, that's a seems like a good little refresher, something a little palate cleanser for us."
Yeah. What drew you to the Sylvaneth specifically?
Uh, Big trees with big swords. It was pretty much as simple as that one.
Isn't that funny though? Because a lot of times when you're picking an army, it's everybody has weird reasons. Like I picked Skaven because, and I've talked about this. I the dwarves of Votan are my favorite. I was in D&D. I typically play a dwarf. In World of Warcraft, I play a dwarf. I like the whole in the mountain, doing your own thing, making weapons and blacksmith, and that just appeals to me. They didn't have Votan at the time with 40K, so I picked orcs because there is kind of same type of rough and tumble brute, at least feeling like the dwarves are. And so when I came to Sigmar, I was looking at all the different options, and I considered ogres because that's they're very similar. But I thought, they're a little too close to orcs. I don't want to do that. And then I looked at the what are the 10 man dwarves in Sigmar? I can't remember the names.
Oh, the
Um,
Caradron overlords.
Overlords, yeah, yeah. So I looked at those guys. I'm like, I don't know. That's not doing it for me. It reminds me of was it Wizard of Oz 2, Return to Oz with I don't know if you saw that with TikTok. That's what it reminded me of. Um, Shout out to was it Return to Oz? And definitely check that out. It's a super trippy movie, by the way. Super weird. But I didn't want to play this. I picked Skaven at the time just because again they're in the hovels and the caves and dingy and dirty and stuff like that. So I always just think it's interesting why people pick the armies that they do. So I want to do a bit of a callback, and then we're going to get into our army list building here. But going back to your, I was asking you what your handle is going to be, and you picked the Overlord because of Necrons. What was the reason that you picked Necrons in 40K?
So it's funny, before I got into Warhammer, I played a lot of trading card games, and I was definitely fooling around with trying to figure out which ones I like. And ended up finding it's a deck called Reanimator, which basically you throw a bunch of cards in like the trash, and then you play cheap stuff that brings back your big stuff. And so I was looking for something a little bit similar to that one, and I was like, hey, these robots, they keep coming back. You kill them, they keep coming back. You kill them, they keep coming back. And then I
Yeah.
saw a lot of the cool big models that they had. Uh, Once I saw the monolith, I was like, oh man, I've got to get started with those, and ended up playing with those for quite a bit. They're still the army I own the most of, and definitely my favorite to play.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, when I first started with orcs, I asked my son at the time, who was, I think he was like 11, maybe 10. I think something like that when I first started, and asked because we were going in together, which was really a fun thing. We got to experience it together and play together. And he picked Necrons, and he just liked robots. He just thought that was really cool. And funny enough, he's probably going to go into some kind of mechanical engineering, and he wants to build robots. So now he's played with death robots, and now he's going to go build them. So we might have a Terminator situation in the next generation. But I mean, he liked it. He liked the lore of how they could come back, and I liked. I It's one of the similar reasons that I picked orcs in 40K is because you had so many bodies. You know, the horde army, because you just can overwhelm with numbers. Necrons are a little similar to that. They do have some elite units, of course, and that monolith. You're the first person that I've heard that actually has the monolith. Have you played with the monolith?
Oh, it's in almost every list that I play.
Really? Wow. I don't think I've ever seen it on the table. Maybe that was ninth
It
edition and eighth or something, but
Yeah, it was not good in ninth, but I still played it. Just about every Necron list I have starts at 1,600 points instead of 2,000.
I mean how many points is the monolith?
I
It's a
think it's
chunky
like
boy, isn't it?
375.
Yeah, so it better be worth it. But I mean, I think we talked about this in the past that the rule of cool still applies. I would play in the orcs. I would play the Morkanaut. Um, you know, just because I think it's a cool looking model. I like the idea of a big derpy looking robot, going down the battlefield. Not enough to buy the Stompa, sorry. But the Morkanaut looked cool enough, to go with. So even I think at one point it was way overcosted. It was way too expensive from a point standpoint to put out there. But I did it anyway just because it looked cool, and I'd loaded up with guns, and they all hit on fives, which was terrible because of orcs, and shooting is not great. But it was fun to play. So the monolith is something that you use. I, did you have? I had the same struggles when I was putting my son's Necrons together. The older Necron models, I I mean, I wanted to throw them all against the wall because I felt like I had to have five hands to put these things together because you had to hold the arms, the torso, everything all together at once. And I was using super glue, and so I'd have like skin, fragments coming off of my fingertips. Did you have the same problem with the old Necrons, or maybe did you have one of those fancy tools with the tweezers on them, like the Doc Ock looking tool?
So I had some tweezers, but not like those fancy ones. They were Since they were the first army I built, I didn't know what I was doing at all. So I've got wrong arms on each one of the warriors. Like they're all twisted and mangled. Half of their chests don't even fit right. But it was a
Hmm.
blast to put them together. I didn't know better at the time. Had I known better, might have been a different story. But thankfully they weren't the old ones with the tubes on the guns. But they definitely weren't put together at the best.
Yeah, yeah. Man, I'm they when they went to the single pose um, Necron models, a lot of people complain that that you lose some of the customization when that happens, and everybody's models look the same when you're putting a Necron warrior out there. But I actually liked it because I didn't have to have the multi-armed assembly anymore, and I wasn't super gluing my fingers to those models anymore. And some of the older legacy Necron models, especially the what's the one that's kind of like it looks like a Klingon ship, where it's like you have to sandwich it together. It's like built in layers. You start with the bottom
Oh,
layer, and what
yes.
is that thing? What is that
Oh
thing called?
gosh. I think it's the Tesseract Volt.
I don't remember what it's called. I just remember really cool looking model, but man, the thing was, ugh. If you had one piece off and you put that top layer of the sandwich on the model and tried to super glue that down,
Mhm.
it wasn't going to fit, and so you always had to smash it or just really like hold it close together to get it to fit. Did you have the same struggles with those models, or Are you did you figure out a way to make them immaculate?
Oh yeah, no, definitely had some struggles. A lot of the joints never like to sit right, but sprue goo is your best friend for those.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't have sprue goo. Mine was just super glue, so almost as good. Well, anyway, so I mean, I think that going back to, I know we kind of did a little bit of rabbit trail there, but going back to the Age of Sigmar app, we we'll see. I am disappointed that it doesn't have the command bunker feature on there, but it will definitely come out in the future. I have no doubt, but it'll be, shortly after they knock the faction cards down really cheaply and put those on sale, and they sell them all, and then they say, "Hey, you don't need them anymore." So that's the way the commercial racket goes, I guess. Well, let's now skip over to our last topic, a little bit of a meatier topic, and another edition of Warhammer 101. And Will, one of the reasons that I thought this was the a great time to bring you on the show because, like I said, you are a bit of a rules lawyer, rules master. I'm not the only one anymore, which is I'm in good company now, and I'll just be coming to you whenever I need a ruling on something. But you have quite the extensive knowledge on building lists, and so for new players, some of this is a little bit of terminology, but building a list is really assembling all your units together with the appropriate points. So you pick a 2,000 point game, 1,000 point game for whatever number of points that you want to play, and you have to pick units together. Typically, there's, depending on the armies that you play, some going back to orcs, there's just a ridiculous amount of model choices that you can have and combinations, and there's so many units that you could put in there. Which ones are good, which ones are bad? Is it optimized? Are you going to go over? And so then when you're putting your, especially if you're using the app, if you put too many of one unit on there, or you change some war gear options or something, and now your points are over, which ones do you get rid of? Oh boy. I mean, it can be daunting. So after you've played a lot of games, if you become more of a veteran of the game, it's a little easier to throw together a list at the last minute, which is typically what I do because I don't plan as well. But if somebody's coming over to my house to play a game of 40K, I'm like, oh man. And so like an hour before, I'm quickly throwing together a list and hoping for the best. But if you're more of a planner, which I think most of our listeners probably are, wanting to not take the lazy man's approach like mine. Um, but we thought for our segment of Warhammer 101, it would be good to go over list building, army list building. And we've got some steps that we can go through here. And Will, I'm going to turn it over to you as far as the first thing. So let's say I am a brand new player, and majority of our listeners are new players, or at least dads. As we have a lot of dads listening that maybe don't have as much time to commit to this and really learning about it, and perhaps our podcast is the only time that they can get any kind of strategy whatsoever. But if they're trying to build a list and they don't know where to start, what's a good first step for them to start thinking about?
So before any of that, number one thing, rule of cool is always going to trump anything that I say. If you've
Yeah.
got your models, you definitely want to play those. But if you're looking to get a little bit more in depth with it, we've got a couple steps for you. So step one, you definitely want to know what your goal is. Uh, if you want to play a casual list, you can get away with a few more things. You can make your list a little bit more flavorful. Try some detachments that you may not have seen too much in like sort of competitive scenes. I've got a Imperial Fist list that's only Gravis armor. So that's like my flavorful list thing for it. Uh, are you playing against new players? Are you teaching somebody the game? Things like that. You might want to see if you're a competitive player. Are you looking to try to get squeeze every drop out of that list? Every unit's going to serve its specific purpose. You know exactly what's going on with that one. You got very little fat in those lists. Everything has a purpose. Or maybe you're sort of in between. Maybe you're just trying to sort of have a fun game against the guys. Don't want to go too easy on them. Don't want to smash them, anything like that. Sort of a nice little mixture. I think that's where the peak Warhammer is played in between those two.
Yeah, I,
Uh,
I would agree. I think that the first time that I put together a list, I mean, when I orcs were my first army, and my list consisted of whatever I bought. So, I mean, I did all of the research. I'd go online to figure out what is the best list, and what the heck is a list. I keep hearing this word list. What does that even mean? And so some of it is you have to learn the terminology and what everybody's talking about. And then even worse is if you're looking online, people, especially if you go to Reddit, everyone uses shorthand and abbreviations, and you don't even know what things are. Because you go to the Warhammer store, go online or go in store, you're going to see names of models, and you're like, well, wait a minute, that's not what everybody calls it on Reddit. They've got some weird, acronym for it. So I remember, and that's why I think, just to kind of echo what you're saying, the rule of cool being so important, because when I went to the Warhammer store, I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to play orcs. And the guidance that I was given, just get a box of orc boys. They're going to be in every list no matter what. And that's good, right? That was helpful. But I was still having to, I mean, I think I bought a box of Gretchen, which are the little goblin guys, and then I bought a box of Orc Boys, and then I think I bought a truck, and that was all I had. So my list consisted of those things. It doesn't matter what what I should be fielding, but my goal was just to put something on the table. So kind of going back to the casual approach, I wasn't trying to be casual. It was just I was dipping my toe into Warhammer, and I picked what I thought looked cool and sounded cool, like a Mad Max kind of thing, and that's what I fielded. But there was no way for me to really know whether that was going to be good. Did you have a similar experience when you first started playing, or did you go all in and buy 2,000 points worth of models?
oh, it was bad. I found one of my first lists on the Battle Scribe app the other day. I was looking through it. It was shocking. It was just anything I could get my hands on. I was grabbing it, spray painting it, little detail, get it on the board as soon as possible.
Yeah. I mean, did you put together, was your list just awful, like, competitively? Was it just a bunch of stuff on the table?
Pretty much, yeah. I joined a league at the Games Workshop store when I first got started, and looking back, and I scored 20 points in 3 games.
There you go. Hey, those 20 points count for something, you know?
Absolutely.
I mean, but that's the thing, is that you just don't know. You don't know. Well, I mean, the old adage, you don't know what you don't know. So you buy all these models, you get them out there, you're really proud potentially of your shoddy paint job, because everybody's first paint job is absolutely horrid, unless you are an actual artist, and then I'm sure it looks amazing. But I don't know, mine was pretty bad. But I put it on there. I'm really proud until you show it to somebody else, and they're like, "Wow, that's really good." Then you see their models, and you're like, "Oh no, theirs
Oh,
looks
it's
so much better
shocking.
than mine."
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I like that. Identifying what is the goal. What is the goal for you? What are you trying to do? Are you being competitive? Are you being casual? Rule of cool, all those things. So all right. So now, kind of theater of the mind. I've got my goal in mind. Maybe I want to be casual to start, and I'm with some buddies. What's our next step in list building?
So next step is to make the plan. So you got to figure out what type of game you're going to be playing. Am I playing 1,000 points? Am I playing 2,000 points? My lists look extremely different between those two. 1,000 point games, I like to mess around, play some funky detachments, things people might not have seen. 2,000 points, they look a little bit different, a little bit more streamlined, things like that. Uh, Next step is definitely finding units that fit your game plan. So, for example, my Imperial Fists, I wanted all Gravis armor, units like Heavy Intercessors, the Aggressors, things like that. Things that fit your plan, whether it's casual, competitive, depending on your army, it may look wildly different. Uh, if you're casual, you may want to fit your favorite units in there. So I know oftentimes like the sort of top tier Necron lists, they definitely don't have units like Imhotep. They definitely
Hmm.
don't have units like Orokin. I run those in almost every single Necron list I can fit in. Those things are fantastic. I love having fun with those guys. Uh, Other things to look for in your game plan. Look for neat little combos you can find. Uh, remember every leader's got some form of interaction with the unit. Find those little ones that work really well together. Orican gives his whole unit a 4-up invuln save. Throwing him on a group of warriors, now you got 20-man unit with 4-up invuln. Throw that on the center objective. It's going to take a lot to move that around. Just little things like that. Every army's got their own little twists, things like that. But that's what makes the game so fun. And then next step is going to be maximizing your goal. A lot of this comes from practice with your list. I know certainly I can throw a list together. My first game is going to look really, really bad. You give me that same list, a couple games of practice, it's going to definitely look a little different. That comes
Mm,
from knowing what your units do, what they fight well, what they don't fight well, how to throw those at certain things, get them going. I know I'm not going to take a unit of immortals and send it at one of your trucks. I might send that at your boys, things like that.
hmm What do you, I mean? I think that's great. Like, because I remember there's so much, especially if you're new, there's so much information thrown at you. You walk into the store, there's just tons of boxes. There's so many options. You're just information overload, and then you get stuff painted and you're ready to go, and then you get the rule book down and you read through that and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't, like I can't even remember what I'm supposed to roll, when I'm supposed to roll it, much less think about synergies and what works well. And so I think, what kind of to your point, what you just mentioned is the practice element. But I don't know about your experience, but that's a bit of a tough pill to swallow because I had just spent all this money. And if we're playing and I put these models on the board, I don't want them just to get tabled. I spent a ton of time and money on these things and reading an investment of just mental space trying to remember everything, and then I still am so out of my league. Um, so I think that your second tip is incredibly important, but also with the caveat is maybe the answer to this is you just don't know. You don't know what your plan is. And I think that's why you bring up, well, just get out there and start playing because you're going to learn when you play. Don't throw your ranged guys into melee. I know they have a combat knife or they have some kind of, they can hit with fists or whatever. It's not a good idea. That's like a last resort kind of thing. But you don't know that until you actually experience it. So did you have moments like that when you first had your first game or your first list where do you have anything in specific where you remember you're like, oh my goodness, why did I do that? And this was a terrible experience.
Oh, absolutely. My favorite model in the Necron range is Illuminator Xeris. I worked
Yeah.
super hard on him, got him super well painted up. First game on the table, I moved him like 3 inches too far out. Immediately got like shot by 3 Mauler fiends. My buddy was like, "Oh, wait, you just finished painting that one? That's where I'm going for." Uh,
Oh no.
oh yeah, we do that to each other all the time. But I think the biggest way to improve in this game, there's so much stuff, but just make those mistakes. You learn from those mistakes. Uh,
Yeah.
you know what to do, what not to do, things like that. Lord knows I've made a ton of mistakes in this game. I know what not to do more than what I know to do. So,
Yeah, I mean, I played against Lee recently over the weekend, and I mean, I think I make at least 3 or 4 mistakes every single phase. It's like, oh man, I shouldn't have deployed my guys there. Oh man, I can't believe I moved. Why did I move that person over there? Why did I move him away from the objective? Why did I charge? Oh, that was so dumb. Like, I mean, I've played hundreds and hundreds of games of Warhammer at this point, and I still there's only so much you can do, and I'm not a perfectionist, but I do like to think of myself as a strategist. I like to really calculate my moves, but sometimes, and I'll say this about your second tip too, is like you just got to go for it. You just have to just to see what happens. Sometimes put your favorite units out there, ones that you think look really cool, and they have some abilities. Like I'd go with my Morkanaut, and he's got a ton of rockets. Well, that's awesome. And then I go out and find that, well, okay, they hit on fives. So it doesn't matter how many dice I get to roll. They're still only hitting on fives. So that was a big whiff. Okay, what can I do to bump him up a little bit? Can I take a different clan option? Oh, that's neat. And then the dominoes start falling. So I think identifying what your game plan is important, but also with the understanding of you may not know what your game plan is until you played several games, unfortunately. So it's kind of like chicken or the egg situation, but it is what it is. That's the welcome to Warhammer, right? So,
Absolutely.
all right, so let's go on to step 3.
So step three is going to be your filling in the blanks. So you got your favorite models, you got the models that do things really well. So now we want to finish out your lists. Uh, you've got extra points usually. Small units that can harass the opponents. So things like, for example, for Necrons, your scarabs. They're great at throwing things, getting in front of in front of your key units. They can block the charge. They can jump on some vehicles and blow up things like that. Great little harassment tools. You want something that can hold the home objective. So for Space Marines, either sometimes you can put like a big tank on there that can have a nice little line of sight. For Necrons, I usually use the death marks. They're the little sniper guys. They can shoot when somebody drops near them. So great little things to hold on to a home objective. It's just important to remember the game is essentially just capture the flag. You want to have something
Mhm.
on that home spot pretty much all the time. Uh, Other things, enhancements. Once you've got all your stuff going through, if you got extra points here and there, 20, 30 points, feel free to cash in on one of those. There's almost always something somewhat useful in every detachment for those. But the biggest one for, especially for, I haven't played the Pariah Nexus cards yet, but for Leviathan, it was super important to have something, I call them action monkeys, something that can either zip around the battlefield, they can try to snag an objective your opponent ran off, or something that
Mhm.
can get to like a corner to investigate signals, things like that. Just something you can get those little 5, 10 points here and there. Even if it's like a 50, 60, 70, even 80-point model, if it's able to get that victory points out of it, makes it totally worth it. It's just
Yeah,
important. Yeah, good.
I would say, just don't sleep on the cheap units, right? Just because they're not super expensive elite level units, that doesn't mean that they don't serve a purpose. I remember when I first started my Space Wolves. I have a Space Wolves army, and I thought the wolves themselves, the Fenrisian wolves unit that you can buy that aren't, they don't look like Space Marines at all. They're actually wool. Well, I mean, what they are technically, but that's more of a lore thing. But anyway, the wolves look cool, but stats wise, they're terrible. They're fast. They're not going to do much damage against anything. But I bought 2 boxes of them because number one, they were relatively inexpensive from a cost standpoint, and they were cheap from a points standpoint too to put on the board. And I thought, well, they look cool and they're easy to paint. Contrast paints on the fur. You know, it's really really easy to paint. So I put those on there, and of course I ran them straight into the army that I was playing against, and they got absolutely annihilated immediately. I thought, why in the heck would anyone play these things? Until I started playing, I played a 2,000 points game, and they had, I think the game that we were playing, this was a long time ago, but they had objectives in the far corners of the map, and so I came in with my Space Marines. I had a couple of dreadnoughts. The Bjorn the Fell Handed, I think that's what his name is. Yeah, it's been a while since I played Space Wolves, but I had some of my heavy hitters going up the board, and then I just took my wolves, and they're relatively fast, and advanced them and ran them around the battlefield, and they would just camp on objectives behind ruins. I mean, and that worked for me, right? I mean, they controlled the objective, um, and they became more of an annoyance. And I think same thing with about Gretchen with the orcs, is that they're incredibly weak, but they're also cheap. So you could fill an army with a lot of these cheap units to go hold the objectives, because it really makes you feel stupid when you put you play a game and you have objectives, like you have your home objective, and the only thing you can do is put like a character model or some unit of troops just to sit there, and then you feel like an idiot because you didn't put your long range snipers, or you didn't have a tank or something, like, I don't know, something like that, to camp on those objectives. So those cheap units are really beneficial So I mean, do you use like is that what you do for Necrons? I mean, those scarabs. I can't remember if there used to be restrictions on what can hold objectives. Scarabs can hold objectives now, right?
As long as they're within range of a crypt deck, but naturally they just have 0 OC, so they're
Okay.
just mostly just to throw around and things like that. But the
Okay.
snipers sit on there and they just camp the entire game. They don't ever move.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect. I mean, but that's the point too, because if you were to deploy your death marks, your snipers, um, somewhere in a more advantageous position, that's something you want to think about too. Is that who's going to sit on the objectives, and can they still be effective in the game, or are they just objective holders? And in my case, with my wolves or my Gretchen, they're kind of just objective holders unless they're fulfilling some function of standing in front of a charge or something like that. So all right, so we've identified our goal of what we want to do on our list. We have also looked at our game plan of how we want to play, what kind of units we want to assemble, what are our core group of units, and then we're filling in the blanks with either filler, cheap units, but also some things that are going to do actions for us, whether in game or holding objectives, looking at secondaries, etc. What's our next step?
So the next step happens after the game's over. You want to tweak your lists here and there, but not too much. Post game review, see what worked, see what didn't. If this one unit you've been playing, you've used them a couple games, never turned out super well, maybe you might want to consider cutting that, swapping them out for something else. Uh, you don't want to change too much at one time. Again, a lot of the success from a list comes with practicing it. Uh, I know Stephen Box was on your show not too long ago.
Hmm.
I know on his podcast he recommends no more than 10% at a time. So 200 points max. Change that up. See if something works. If it doesn't, maybe swap it back, swap some war gear around, things like that. Maybe try change how you're deploying, change how you're using certain units. Uh, but it's definitely important to just see tweak some stuff around. Sometimes you may have a list you're just like really set on, really works out well. You may not have to change anything. Uh, one of the best things about Warhammer is there's no one size fits all list. I can't. There's no perfect list to make. You can't make a list that's going to do everything into everything. So there's always some little challenge here and there to work with.
Yeah, I think too. It's knowing the strengths and weaknesses of your army. Again, I go back to referencing orcs, where their strength is definitely their numbers and their melee. Their weakness, and I guess it depends on what clan you take and buffs and stuff, but it's still pretty terrible. Is their shooting? Their shooting is absolutely hot trash. It's bad, and but I think my expectation, then my strategy changes a little bit. So for my list, it's still important to have some shooting threat, because if it gets to the shooting phase and you took absolutely nothing that could do any damage, well, then you're just kind of missing out an opportunity. Even if you do one wound on a unit across the board, well, hey, that's one less wound that you have to deal with, and maybe that's your opportunity to take out some of the weaker units. So if your opponent has filler units like we just talked about, maybe that's what you take your weaker shooting army after. But my goal with orcs is to run them up the field as quickly as possible and get into melee. Like that's what I want, and to spend my WOG ability usually hopefully in the second round. That'd be awesome, but typically it's in the third round, and maybe I don't have my strongest guys anymore. But so that's how I can tweak my armies. But to your point, it also depends on your opponent, because if a one list is incredibly successful against one army, and then I take it up against a different army, I may get tabled, turn one, turn two as a result. So you need to have, as much as it pained me to realize this early on when I was buying models, is that I remember getting to the point where I had 2,000 points of orcs, and I thought, okay, I'm set, I'm good. And then I realized that, and I'm not a huge collector. I mean, I say that I've got now like 8 armies, but I'm not a collector just for collector's sake, is what I'm saying. Um, but I had 2,000 points, and then I realized that, well, if I go up against a certain type of army with maybe high toughness, or I need something a little faster. I need more vehicles, because if I'm playing against Necrons or an army that has high shooting, really good shooting, then my boys are going to die. I mean, immediately. I can't even have a couple of turns to get them up the field. So I need to put them in vehicles. But maybe I don't have as many vehicles because I just have 2,000 points. So I think it's important to think about having some variety on your shelf so that when you are making those changes, you do have something to pull from and you're not just doing like I did and saying, well, this is what I bought. So there's not much change I can do. I do like the tip for the 10% variance because just from I come from a process improvement background. So if you identify what you're going to change and you change too much, you have no idea what worked. Like it could have been something, if you make 5 changes, well, which one helped you out? You really don't know. And so I think making a small change is definitely the way to go. But going back to practice, Will, has there been something recently where you played a game where maybe a tactic or a part of your list worked really well, and then you had to turn around and play a different game, and you had to completely change up that strategy, whether it be your deployment, your movement, your charging, what have you?
Absolutely. I've got two buddies. They play totally different. One of them, he loves his Raven Guard, so really fast, really weak models. They run around, they score objectives really well. Hard to hit. Their detachment rule gives them stealth, makes it harder to hit. Benefit of cover. My shooting, it works pretty well in there, but you definitely want to trap them around. And then I got a buddy who loves his knights, and I love taking a ton of Necron infantry. So all
Mhm.
those AP0, AP1 shots, they're not doing anything into those nights. So you'd really have to change the game plan around, make them get in pretty bad positions to where they're able to get a ton of shots off at once and pray a bunch of that stuff sticks.
Yeah. Yeah, but a lot of that is, especially if you're new to an army, if you just started collecting it, I mean, you're just not gonna know. You may read up on it and you may have a perfect game plan, and then you play against someone else's army, and it's completely thrown off for the models that you purchased. So it really takes a lot of practice and playing a lot of games, and I've listened to several podcasts, Vanguard Tactics, of course, being one of them. But any competitive podcast will talking about prepping for tournaments, they will tell you just to get reps in, and I always thought that was the dumbest thing. Like, what are we talking about? We're not talking about lifting weights or, training for the Olympics or something. We're talking about playing a tabletop game. And then, my old man brain comes in and I'm like, well, wait a minute. I can't remember all this stuff. So yeah, I mean, getting reps, playing lots of games is the way to figure out what works in your list, what is beneficial, what you should change. Um, but the repetition helps me remember what my army list does. And kind of as a callback to our Age of Sigmar app, you're definitely not going to get it with the command bunker now. So you better get your reps in to remember. I'm kidding, sort of. I'm a little better with the lack of command bunker feature. But I mean, I think that hopefully these tips that you've heard us talk about are going to help you build a list. And there is no, just to reiterate, and I say this more for myself, there is no perfect list. There is impossible. Sometimes I can try to be so competitive and build out the right thing, because even if you put the dream list that Reddit will tell you is this is the de facto Necron list. This is what you should run if you're going into this scenario. You still have to play the game and you still have to roll the dice, and all of that will change. And so it's better to be more, I guess, broad with your understanding of your army and your rules than necessarily super deep into any one. Don't be overly committed into one specific unit or list, because when that gets blown off the table, now what? Now what do you do? So I think just educating yourself, unless you have a really good memory and you can remember all these rules, maybe like you will. I sure can't. And so the only way to do that is for me to continue to play games over and over again. So, but anyway, hopefully this is a helpful for you, for our listeners. Another installment of our Warhammer 101. Again, has been received well. So if this is something that you want us to continue to do, and you've got some additional suggestions for us on topics to for us to discuss, please drop us a comment. You can do that on the YouTube video if you're watching this on YouTube. You can also leave us a comment within our Spotify, has a comment section now. And then finally, of course, you can email us at contact@dadhammerstudios.com, or social media. You can drop us a comment there too. So love to hear from you. Really appreciate the support. And of course, leave a review. We can read that on our next episode here of the Dad Hammer podcast. So Will, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate all the commentary. I look forward to playing against your Necrons. And now you've got the official moniker. You have to live up to your Overlord, your name now. So I'll have to bring my Votan and their stumpy legs to your reanimated Necrons.
A lot of pressure on me now.
That's what I bring. I bring the pressure with my short warriors. Who, by the way, I played a recent game, and the Votan are no joke now. Like after they went through some struggles, right? When they came out of the gate on 9th edition, they were absolutely destroying all, and they nerfed them way too much, and they became absolutely trash. And then they lowered the points for the models. Now you can put more on the table, but they also made the judgment tokens. Now I can dish out four judgment tokens at the beginning of every game, and every model, depending on if you play a 2,000 point game, they get 2 judgment tokens, which means I get a +1 to hit and wound on any model or any unit that has those judgment tokens. So I was basically hitting on 3s and wounding on 2s because their strength is pretty high on their strength. Yeah. So Votan are no joke now, and it makes me very, very happy. So beware. I'm coming for you. Well, Will, thank you again very much for joining. That will do it for this episode of the Dad Hammer podcast. Thank you to the Overlord. I am David the Warboss, and until next time, remember that all of your pile of potential boxes can double as terrain, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone.